Holding up. I only see one camera, so it's starting to get
Ready to
that
be
time.
ready to be done.
Yeah, seriously. Done with a lot of things. I just want to go surfing so bad, and I know that I can't ride a ferry boat right now. So I've been reading Surfer's Journal a lot, trying to escape that way. Um, okay, so today we are going to introduce the project and then spend a little time on food and land management. Two things I don't really know much about at all. So I'll just kind of fake my way through those. But I'd be stoked if any of you use that for one of your actual Mac projects, because then I would learn something. But no pressure. You guys can do something easy too, like a Nest thermostat. All right, so my screen is shared. Let me make this big. Turn on the pointer. All right. So this is from last year, the first time I ever taught this class. And May 11th last year, we hit a new record of CO2 in the atmosphere, 415 parts per million. And so this is the so-called Keeling curve, named after the scientists that first started taking these measurements up on Mauna Loa Observatory. And they've been steadily going up, and this is representative of a slightly exponential curve. It's a low exponential, but you still see that concavity, so it's an exponential, which is not good. And this up and down movement is all just due to seasonality. So every spring, late spring and summer in the northern hemisphere, which dominates the land mass of the planet, CO2 is pulled out of the atmosphere by the biosphere, trees and plants and all that sort of thing, tundra. And then every fall and winter, it decays and releases that CO2 back into the atmosphere. So at the very end of northern winter and just at the beginning of spring, towards the middle of spring, which is right now, is when it always peaks. So it always peaks about mid-May. And so last year we were at 415, and this year we hit a new record. We're at 415, 16, 17. So this is just zooming in on the last couple years, last 2 years. So yeah, we were at 412 May 2018, 415 May 2019, and now we're at 417 on May 2020. So it's ticking up, continuing to tick up every year. I was hoping that it would be kind of down a little bit this year from lack of automobile and plane and shipping transport due to COVID-19, but I guess that hasn't been reflected yet, or if it was a marginal effect. So we still got a problem. We got to solve it. You guys have seen this slide a few times this quarter. So 3 steps to reduce emissions are energy efficiency, use less of the energy we use, make it be electricity, and when we use electricity, clean it up and make it be renewable. So these are the 3 carbon mitigation strategies categories that I know really well. The stuff that I'm not as familiar with is sequestration, or sequestering the carbon. And so we do that with forestry, forest management, don't cut down trees and plant trees, basically. And then, and if we need products like lumber and paper, use very fast growing trees so that we can treat different forest lands as a farm, as you will. And that would be basically carbon neutral, because we pull carbon out of the atmosphere to make the tree, and then we cut it down, but then we plant a new tree in its place. And the other big thing that can limit carbon emissions is farmland, agriculture use. And the biggest of those is obviously cattle, enteric guts of cattle and sheep. Not too many mutton fans here in America. It's more of like an English and Australian and New Zealand thing. Okay, so diving into agriculture. Here are all the greenhouse gas emissions that occur with agriculture. When we make fertilizers, we take methane and water, H2O and CH4, and we steam reform the water pull hydrogens from the water and from the methane and combine it with nitrogen that exists naturally in the atmosphere. We call the atmosphere is like mainly all nitrogen. I forget the percentage. It's something like 90% or something. And so we combine the O's from the water and the N's from the atmosphere. And we combine the hydrogen from the methane and the water with the nitrogen from the atmosphere to make ammonia nitrate fertilizer. And so that produces a lot of CO2 because the carbon from the natural gas from the methane that the hydrogen was stripped off of reacts with the oxygen in the water and produces CO2. And so in a sense, I forget who said it. I think it was Alan Bartlett that said that we eat natural gas. And what he meant by that is we take natural gas to make ammonia nitrate, and then we fertilize all our fields with ammonia nitrate, and then we eat what the fields produce. So that's a big component, fertilizer production. We over-fertilize things, and we'll talk about that a little later in this lecture. And so there's this leaching and runoff of nitrogen that causes bad things in like the Gulf of Mexico, the algae blooms and things like that, and cause dead zones, anoxic dead zones in the ocean. But it also, that fertilizer that's leaching off the farmlands reacts with the atmosphere. I mean, it's an exothermic reaction and produces more nitrous oxide. And then on the farmlands itself, there's scope 1 emissions. There's farm equipment constantly burning diesel, chucking CO2 out. There's fossil fuel for heating in different agricultural processes for the farmhouse itself, for dairies and other livestock that need to stay warm. There's usually natural gas being burned to keep them warm. There's manure deposited on pasture lands, and enteric fermentation produces a lot of CH4, a lot of methane. Unfortunately, most of the methane that comes out of a cow comes out of its mouth. They burp it. 95% of the methane is burped. And so I appreciate things like anaerobic biodigesters, for example, in Edeling Farm, and you all are welcome to do a project on that for your MAC calculation, and I can help a lot with that. I had a whole homework made on biodigesters that I'm not going to include this quarter because we lost a week and things are crazy. And so if you want some help thinking about that, I've done a lot of thinking about that, so I can give you that homework and the answers to that, and we can talk more. So abiotic digesters are great, but they only take care of 5% of the problem. 95% of the methane is just burped out of the cow. And unless they all wore like face masks or something, I don't know how you'd capture that. It's insane. So we can't fix the cow problem with abiotic digesters. All right. And then there's more nitrous oxide formation from just the fertilizer decomposing on the farmlands themselves. Here's a big table of all the different emissions associated with everything. Again, this is that 2012 source, the last time we really kept count of things, at least in America, from the EPA. And yes, fossil fuels dominate: coal, oil, natural gas. But then there's these big, significant percentages. So fertilizers, soil, that's 5% of greenhouse gases. Livestock is 2%. More and more analysis recently, like the AR5 report, states that this is closer to 5 to 8% of emissions worldwide. And that's just because our understanding of how methane contributes to global warming has really changed in the last decade, from 2012 to present day. So farm use is a good 10%, right? So it's something that we need to keep track of. All right, here's a little food quiz. You guys can respond in the chat or speak out loud. What fraction of food doesn't make it to the table? What fraction of food just ends up in the dumpster?
Isn't it like
40%?
I forget, actually. I made this slide about a month ago. So I heard 30% or 20%, 0.3 to 0.5%.
40%?
40%. Okay, yeah, 40%. 33%. Yeah, I think that might be more typical for like American values. I don't know what they are worldwide, but the answer is about to come up. I know when I was in grad school, I lived off this, man. I would just go to the dumpster behind the cafe at UC Santa Cruz campus, and we just raid that for sandwiches. And then I think I've already told this story to my LCA class. But anyways, then they like put a lock on it so we couldn't get into it anymore. But this one kid who was an geoengineering grad student, so he had all these crazy tools in his lab. He sawed a little hatch on the back so we could still get in, and they didn't know about it. So I'm very appreciative of food waste at certain times in my life. 1/3. You guys got it. Good job. All right. So how many people will go hungry today? That's 800 million. So that's really depressing, right? So there's 7.8 billion people. So something like 12% of the planet goes hungry, and 33% of the food goes to waste. So we could easily feed those people with all the food that's being wasted. And the food that we waste contributes to about 8% of anthropogenic emissions every year. And these are recent calculations that have been done by Heller et al. Out of UW-Madison, I think in 2018. So just the food we waste is like a big thing that we're recognizing as part of greenhouse gas problem. So why do we waste all this food? So this is from Drawdown, solution number 3. So it's the third most valuable solution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions because it captures that 8%. So the problem depends on where you live. If you live in a rich place, it's because you're snooty about your food. You're like, this apple has a bruise on it. 95% of the apple is perfectly fine. 5% has a bruise, which is still edible. You could just make applesauce, or better yet, apple cider out of it. But instead we're like, this apple's no good, so we throw it away. There's the problem with ugly food at the grocery stores. You'd never see nothing but a perfect carrot at Whole Foods, which is a big problem. There should be an ugly fruit bin at different places, and different stores are starting to do that sort of thing. I know the Co-op does. Yeah, what's up, Vi?
Dad, I can't turn this on.
Is this your reading for school today?
Mm-hmm.
Try to just open it again. I think you have like 1 billion tabs open. Wow. Sorry guys. She has like 40 tabs open. Alright. Okay, try it again. Huh. Something's wrong with it. I'm guessing your teacher didn't put the right website. I'll check it again in a little while. Sorry, bye.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, so the problem with rich places is we reject food. Problem with developing nations is there's huge structural issues, supply chain issues, right? Even if the food is produced somewhere, there's no way to get it to different communities. It's difficult to get it into slums outside of Nairobi or outside of Mumbai, for example. And we're running into those here today in America, right, with coronavirus. So there's these farms producing tremendous amount of livestock, chickens and pigs, but all the meat processing facilities are getting shut down because they're disgusting, and it's basically like a wet market, right? One of the theories where this coronavirus came from is these wet markets in Wuhan, China. A wet market is a place where things are being slaughtered and sold. And yeah, we don't really have those kind of wet markets where we point the animal we want and then they kill it for us. But it's just removed out of sight, right? So a meat processing plant is a wet market. There's only a few buyers, and those are the grocery stores, and that's where we purchase our meat. But it's a place that's ripe for bacterial and viral spread because there's just biological tissue all over the place. And so they're shut down here in America right now. And so now thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of chicken and pigs are just being culled and not being used at all. They're just being wasted. And so that's a supply chain issue that's now happening in developing nations due to coronavirus. Okay, so the biggest problem is structural issues and willful rejections, and that's why so much, 1/3 of food is wasted, and it contributes to 8% of emissions. Okay. This is that Heller et al. Paper, and it just says that our emissions are increased by about a factor of 25% or more just due to food losses. CED means cumulative energy demand, so this shows energy losses due to food waste versus greenhouse gas losses. Okay, drawdown solution number 5 is plant-rich diet. It says we should focus getting our calories from plant-based foods, and livestock accounts for 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That was the percentage that I was looking for, so it's way up from that 2012 estimate. And that's just due to our better understanding of nitrous oxide and methane as greenhouse gases. Some comprehensive assessments say even more than 50%, and that's looking at scope 3 emissions and looking at the burps. A lot of these initial estimates were just based on the manure, and we didn't realize so much was coming out just as burps. So this would be good for the planet if we steered away from some of these things. It's bad for your health too. Overconsumption of protein, particularly mammal meat, leads to cancer, stroke, heart disease, all these sorts of things. Average adult needs about 50 grams of protein per day. Average Americans consume 90 grams of protein per day. People like Joe Rogan probably consume like 500 grams per day. It's a necessary thing, but it shouldn't be the only thing you eat. And in particular, mammal meat you should treat as something, like a luxury item, or something that you rarely eat, and you should do that for both the planet and the health. And yes, I'm preaching right now, but these are kind of obvious things. Like, I don't feel like you should have to preach things that are actually good for everything all around, except for like the fact that you want to eat bacon on everything. Your emotions and desires aren't always correlated with the greater good. So that's what I do. I treat it like, scotch or something like that. I've eaten beef once this entire year. I know a lot of you are even better than me. Sometimes I just want a Dick's hamburger, Jesus. Okay. The world switching to vegetarian diet that includes eggs and cheese would save $1 trillion per year in healthcare and $30 trillion per year in preventing lives lost. So this would, save 13% of global GDP, not just American global GDP. So this would completely remove all the financial losses from coronavirus, just by making these kinds of switches. Problem is, diet is crazy personal, and it's also very cultural. Oftentimes it's even religious. So telling people what to eat, man, you think that people in Linden going crazy with not being able to get a haircut right now, it's trouble. Try telling them what they can and can't eat. So it's a big structural cultural problem. So this is something where education and even free markets and capitalism could actually help with this. Agriculture, meat industry is highly subsidized. If we took those away, then the true price of meat might become more apparent. We make fun of Canada because they have to pay like $20 for a pound of chicken or something. That's the real price of a chicken. A chicken shouldn't be free, but apparently it is here because of subsidies. All right. I'm not going to belabor this too long. The point of this table from Heller et al. Is percentage of contribution to total greenhouse gas emissions from food. And you can see meat completely dominates, 56%, followed by dairy, which is just another way of eating meat, right? Beverages, I'm guessing this is like wine and beer and soda. And then everything else is below that. The other thing to take from this is these so-called quintiles. So it groups the population it divides the population into five pieces. So if there's 100 people, 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, 20. And 20% of the population is only responsible for 27% of emissions. Another 20% of the population, the highest 20% of the population, is responsible for 70% of the emissions. And so that was what I stated was wrong. I was talking about the top two quintiles here. So this is a better display of what I tried to say. So here are percentage of population, different diets. And it's basically saying 20% of the population is basically responsible for most all the emissions, nearly half the emissions. And the vegan monks that live in Tibet are only responsible for 6% of the emissions. And so this is something to consider. The average person isn't doing terribly. You could work your way down into these other quintiles by just giving up meat once a week. But per usual, there's just a few people that kind of ruin it for everybody, right? So that's what's happening here. Wear your mask. All right. Number 11 solution from drawdown.org is regenerative agriculture. So this lowers emissions in two ways. It restores degraded land, and so just having ruminant animals march on grasslands actually causes more carbon sequestration in those grasslands. The animals fertilize the grasslands. The grass goes stronger and better. The roots go deeper into the ground, and so this is a great way to sequester carbon, is take degraded land that's not being used for anything and start ranging animals over them. Don't have those awful feedlots down in Bakersfield, California. Range the lands, range the cattle over degraded lands, and it helps greatly offset their methane emissions, and it helps sequester carbon in those rangelands. Will the price of beef go up? Yeah, absolutely, because they're not all in a slaughterhouse in a feedlot, and now we have to employ cowboys and cowgirls to keep track of these cattle and things like that. But that's the way it should be done. So that's another idea for a Mac project. Think about what would be the price of regenerative ag and how much would it sequester. Be more responsible about application of fertilizers. This is a busy plot and it barely fits onto this slide. It says the relationship between nitrogen application, so fertilizer application, yield, and nitrous oxide emissions. And so what it's saying is that if you continue to apply fertilizer, that's this green line here, then your yields go up. That's this purple or blue line here. More fertilizer, more yield. But putting more fertilizer on there costs money. This x-axis is ratio of fertilizer kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. And so then there's this, and also when you apply more fertilizer, more of it isn't consumed by the plants, but instead it just leaches off or decomposes into the atmosphere and produces more and more nitrous emissions. And so there's a sweet spot here where you get a pretty good amount of yield, so that's money coming into the farmer, and minimal fertilizer costs. So that's you're not applying as much fertilizer. Yes, if you apply more fertilizer, you'll get more yield, but the cost of the fertilizer will begin to dominate the profits you get from selling your crop. And so if farmers pay attention to these values and push it back to this side where you still are right near the peak of the yield curve, but really minimizing these nitrous emissions. So just being smarter can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another land use solution is tropical staple trees. This is still in the ag side of things. Drawdown solution number 14. Rather than relying on annuals, things that you have to plant over and over and over again, use perennials, things that stay around all year long. And some of these things you can even harvest all year long. So, like guava and passion fruit are always growing in the tropics. You can keep on picking them kind of continuously. Other fruits such as marula are perennial and continuously sequester carbon dioxide. This marula, they make like a liquor out of it. And there's actually some like silly YouTube videos of monkeys and chimpanzees just getting wasted on marula fruit that's fermented and laying on the ground. There's this one like herd, or is it tribe? I forget what they're called. Like a group of elephants that go to the same place every year to have a big party with rotten marula. So, tropical staple trees can make a big difference, not just for elephants, but for humans too, by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So 20.19 gigatons of CO2 could be sequestered by 2050 if we switch from annual tropical crops to perennial tropical crops. And not only that, the yields would be significantly higher, and it works for all sorts of different fruits that grow in the tropics. Okay, another thing, tree intercropping, 17. So again, notice I haven't done a MAT calculation for any of these things. This is beyond my wheelhouse, but I think it's something I want to start studying, and it's kind of the point of being a professor, keep on learning. So tree intercropping is you don't have monocrops, you have different combinations of crops that are symbiotic, that contribute to each other's well-being, either from reducing predation, parasitism, pests, or nitrogen fixing to increase the yields and health of the soil. So if we do intercropping, 571 million acres globally, we could sequester 17.2 gigatons of CO2. And please understand that I'm getting all this information from Drawdown. So use Drawdown as a resource if you want to get motivation for ideas for your MAC project. Managed grazing. So this is, again, similar to what I was talking about. Use marginal lands, not just for farming, but for grazing too. It improves soil health, carbon sequestration, water retention, forage productivity. It's more expensive, but it creates happier, healthier cows and much lower carbon emissions, 16.32 gigatons by 2050. Okay. All right, so that was ag. Switching over to land use. This is bad land use, and this is good land use. All right, so land use could contribute to 17% reductions of global annual greenhouse gas emissions. And this is, again, from Drawdown. So here's building and city emission, electricity generation. These are emission reductions that can occur from these different things. 1 second. My mom was reading a book to Violet. All right. So these are potential reductions in total atmospheric CO2 by 2050 that could occur from these different things. So again, food is this huge bar here, and then land use is this other situation here. So we could get up to 17% under the Drawdown scenario. So land use is in 3 broad categories: ecosystem protection, so that's basically stop chopping down trees; ecosystem restoration, that means planting trees; and then timber and biomass crop solutions. So we still need these products from trees. We need wood, we need paper, etc. So ropes, all sorts of different building materials and various materials. So plant these crops in a responsible way that reduces emissions and increases yield. So these are different emissions that can be reduced from different specific mitigation strategies that fall into those greater categories that I just talked about. And so all of these are potential MAC projects that you could consider. There is a lot of financial information in Drawdown that could be useful to you. And I'm not even going to pretend to like talk about any of these things, but there they are. This is a table format of those different things. Bamboo is a great building material. Yeah. I don't know what peatlands is about. I know that they produce a lot of methane because there's a lot of anaerobic decomposition within peatlands. Okay. Tropical forest would just be stop cutting down the rainforest to grow palm oil or grow cattle. Those are the two big things that tropical rainforests are being removed for. Okay. Weighted emissions, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I described a few of them here, or at least I copied some of the information from Drawdown. So the fifth greatest way to mitigate global warming, according to drawdown.org, by 2050 is tropical forests. So in theory, 751 million acres of degraded land in the tropics could be restored to continuous intact forest using current and estimated commitments from the Bond Challenge in New York, blah, 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 blah. Our model assumes that restoration could occur on 435 million acres. And so this would encourage natural regrowth. Committed land could sequester 1.4 tons of carbon dioxide per acre annually. So 61.2 gigatons in total by 2050. So this is a huge opportunity here. Again, it's complicated. Geopolitics, economics, what's fair, what's not fair, education. These are big, wicked problems. This one I thought was really interesting when I read about it. So grasses for thawing permafrost. This is one of these feedback loop problems. As we warm the planet, the permafrost in the Arctic and subarctic regions, the periglacial regions, will begin to thaw. And this is well entrained with bush and grass and roots from the last ice age. And so this is biotic matter that's just been frozen in place. And as the permafrost thaws, it will then be able to interact with oxygen in the atmosphere and decompose and produce methane and CO2. And so this is one of those horrible positive feedback loops. So when we thaw the permafrost, then we're going to release a bunch more CO2 and methane, which will further thaw the permafrost, which will reduce a bunch more CO2 and methane. So this is already starting to happen. If any of you are from Alaska, you're very familiar with this. You can see those YouTube videos, people at University of Alaska, Fairbanks lighting swamps and things on fire from permafrost melt because of all the methane coming out of it. So one solution is to graze these lands of recently thawed permafrost with livestock, and they'll help aerate, turbate, stir up the soil, and promote growth of grasslands and forests that will take advantage of that biological material and begin to grow grasslands and forests out of it. And so it won't all just go into the atmosphere, and then also CO2 will be sequestered as those crops grow. And it's a huge problem. Like, the amount of carbon in the permafrost is greater than all the forests worldwide. So people say, like, the Amazon is the lungs of the planet. No, it's actually like the permafrost and the taiga. And it's when those lungs breathe out, it's going to be a big expulsion of CO2. So adding to that, here is carbon stocks, gigatons of carbon in vegetation and soil carbon pools to a depth of 1 meter in different locations. Boreal forests, taiga forests is here. Tundra is here, but this is just the first meter. Once you get deeper down into the permafrost, you'll see much greater values. But this is to show that these boreal forests dominate compared to the other forests. This is carbon density. It looks like it's densest in the boreal forest as well. Oh, wetlands, densest in the wetlands. So that's another interesting topic. I don't know how you would produce a MAC curve out of this, but so-called blue carbon, carbon that's sequestered in waters, so mangroves, wetlands, eelgrass, for example, near here. It's something that Professor John Rybzik and Katrina Poppy work on a lot. Thinking about that. And so I don't even know how you'd construct a MAC curve. You'd have to think about like what's the value of that land, what's the value of preserving it, what could you have used it for otherwise. Places like Bow Edison and other parts of Skagit Valley are just drained wetlands that were turned into farmlands. Okay, so the advantages to carbon sequestration. Photosynthesis is a way to sequester carbon, and it's free. Plants are better at this than we are so far. Much better. Plants, what are we world average power consumption? If you plugged in the whole planet, this is Energy 101 stuff. The world consumes 18 terawatts of power. Every second we consume 18 trillion joules. Plants, any given second, are at 90 terawatts. So plants are great at using energy and converting CO2 into food. So photosynthesis, proven technology, it's cheap. Sustainable land management offers local, ecological, economic, and social benefits. Sustainable harvest products can provide additional carbon savings, wood products, that sort of thing. Big challenges: total size of the carbon reservoir is ultimately limited. Competing land use opportunities, so economics, politics, all these things, and it can be difficult to measure. Verifying storage, avoiding double counting, but this is getting easier. I posted additional materials for both land use and agriculture onto Canvas, but they're basically like stream of conscious lectures. They're like 90 slides long and a total mess. But some of the exciting ways to quantify carbon sequestration in land use changes are things like LiDAR and hyperspectral imaging, remote sensing, that can look at how forests are growing. There's some really cool slides that show like, the amount of carbon sequestration in a forest, dependent on the tree, of course, peaks around, 20, 30, 50 years into the tree's growth. So a baby tree is growing really fastly on a percentage wise, but the amount of carbon it's sequestering in its rings isn't that great until it gets to like 20 years old. Then it starts sequestering much more carbon. But then once it gets to an old growth tree, of course you don't want to cut it down, because then all that carbon will be released. They're not sequestering as much carbon because they're growing mass-wise slower than these middle-aged vibrant trees. And if someone knows more about this, please speak up. So it's getting better and better to measure these things. We're getting a better understanding of what cows are up to, those sorts of things. So please refer to those messy lectures if you want more information, or Google, Drawdown, other resources. Okay, so the California Air Resources Board is starting to try to quantify some of these things, and they have this Climate Action Reserve CAR forestry protocol. It's one of the first compliance tools to quantify carbon offsets from land use management. I'm just putting this in here, even though I'm not that familiar with it, just so that you know that these tools exist if this is something you want to pursue, either for your project or even later in your career or studies. I mean, this is the cutting edge stuff. This is really cool stuff. So improved forest management can lead to carbon reductions, and this is how it's quantified. The sequestered carbon total depends on baseline estimated on-site carbon produced, and then the inventory of the carbon, and then what's not what's stored as wood products. So when you cut down a forest, the actual percentage of that forest that turns into lumber, in a sense, that's sequestered carbon, right? It'll last in a house for 100 years if it's built well. But some of that wood decomposes, and so you have to take into account these secondary effect greenhouse gas emissions from project activity and also wood decomposition. And then there's these, you have to take into account the baseline carbon that would have remained stored for at least 100 years in the forest anyway. So if you cut down a 20-year-old tree, that would have still been stored for 100 years. So you have to take that away from what you say would have been stored in the house. Moving on, and I'm not belaboring any of this because I want to get to the project description. You can quantify it for long-lived forest products with this methodology here. The percentage of wood that can be in long-term storage depends on what you're talking about: softwood versus hardwood versus plywood, these different things. So there's different ways to quantify this. If you're into this and want to learn more, please look up these California Air Resource Board carbon for forest lands. Okay. So, making your MAC project. You can choose any mitigation strategy you want. It can be an energy efficiency strategy like a Nest thermostat or switching light bulbs. Please don't do that because we already did that example in class. Electrification, so different ways to, like an e-bike might be a cool project, or electric buses. And then renewable energy. So different interesting topics along those lines might be like community solar, community wind projects, municipalization of power grids or balance authorities. And then if you so desire and if you're interested, please have a look at these land use and agricultural topics that I obviously bumble my way through. So teach me something if you want to. But I understand that these are more reach projects because I'm not going to be of much assistance. Okay, so your task for this project will be to click on it on Canvas, and we'll do that in a second. Let me just describe it. So in short, you're to compute a marginal abatement cost for a greenhouse gas mitigation strategy. Choice of strategy is yours. Ideas to motivate your choice include the City of Bellingham Climate Action Task Force. So the final report is posted on Canvas. Steve Hollenhorst, the Dean of Huxley College, wants a carbon inventory taken for Huxley College, its buildings, and its general operations, so travel or different things like that. And then he wants to create a climate action task force for Huxley College of the Environment. So you could help him get a head start on that if you look at different mitigation strategies for Huxley College of the Environment. This might be too soon, but something that I'm kind of curious about is there's been some drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from COVID-19, but also with super high economic costs. And so my hypothesis is that, yes, COVID-19 reduced emissions, but it costs a lot of money. So the MAC, the marginal abatement cost of that, might be pretty high. And there's better ways of reducing global carbon emissions without such economic hardship. And my motivation for that is to, subversively say that, like, okay, we can reduce carbon without the high economic costs. You can do something that's personally important to you. You could look at, dietary changes, or, the principal agent problem associated with rental properties in Bellingham. I forget what percentage of housing in Bellingham is rental now. It's huge. It's something like 50%. And so how could we reduce emissions in rental communities? That might be something that's important to individuals in your station of life. So different topics like that, riding bikes, e-bikes, these could be all cool different projects along those lines. And then these vanguard topics, so cutting edge science, thinking about how land use and agriculture affect emissions. And I would definitely use Drawdown as a resource for those. Okay, I'm going to switch over to the assignment. So let me put it onto the screen that you guys can actually see. So here's the homework, or the project homework. It's on Canvas. Oh, another thing, you're welcome to work together on this, but I understand that's kind of difficult given that we're all quarantined. But you can have groups, you know, up to about, I'd say, 3 or 4 people max, or you can just do it solo. So you or your team are to generate marginal abatement costs. So the whole point of this is you're just trying to make one of those squares on the marginal abatement cost curves. So let me pull one of those up. So this is a cartoon picture of marginal abatement cost curve, and it's called curve because it has several different MAC calculations associated with it. And so your job is just to make one of these squares. How much greenhouse gases and CO2 equivalent would be abated, and how much will it cost, negative or positive? So for example, here's if all of the city of Toronto powered their city with nuclear energy, it would sequester 1, 2, 3, 4 megatons of CO2, and it would cost about $100 per ton of CO2. So your task is just to make one of these squares for the mitigation strategy that you are interested in. And then I just structured this. What you're turning in, I don't want to report this year. I think that's a waste of your time. What I want is just a short, like, Google Sheet or Google slide or PowerPoint presentation, and that you may present to class. You don't have to if you don't have the online resources, the tech resources to do that. You can just email me the PowerPoint presentation. But I think it'd be kind of fun that last day of class to have a few presentations if you're willing. And then an accompanying Excel file or G Sheet file, Google Sheet file that's similar to like what the homeworks we've been doing. So a little cover sheet of your calculations. For your presentation, tell me what you did. So that would be the background. What is the mitigation strategy? Why is it important? It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be something that saves a tremendous amount of carbon. So like switching to LED light bulbs doesn't save a ton of carbon, but it's dirt cheap. In fact, it's less than cheap. It saves you money. And so that'd be a way to sell that mitigation strategy, switching to LED light bulbs. Yeah, it only gets rid of maybe 1 metric ton per person per year, but it saves them hundreds of dollars over the course of 5 years. So that's the kind of why does it matter, why should we care sort of thing. Another thing I'm interested in is it transferable or scalable? Does it only work in rich places? Does it only work for certain people or certain locations in the planet? Is it something that we can really scale or not? It doesn't have to be, but you need to comment on its scalability. The things I'm most concerned with is your data, and that's actually the hardest part. Calculation, again, calculating a MAC is just a division. It's dollars divided by tons of CO2. It's pretty simple math, but getting the data for that math is really difficult. And massaging, yeah, that's a gross word, sorry, that data into something that you can calculate is difficult. So this is the hard part of the project. Getting the data and making it work so you can do a calculation. I have a few example calculations. So this would be for a energy efficiency measure. So just be like, okay, you have to buy this new efficient thing that's going to cost you money, and you have to pay to operate it, but then you subtract the money that you no longer have to spend in operating the baseline, and then you have this different amounts of fuel being used. You'll be using much less fuel in the new efficient technology or strategy, and then you multiply by the carbon intensity of that fuel. So this is a pretty basic one. It assumes you're using the same fuel and you're just buying something new that uses less energy. It can get a lot more complicated than that. You've seen examples of that where with like fuel switching, for example, in the last homework, the Pebble Beach homework, where it gets a little complicated when you're switching from diesel to natural gas. All right, tell me what your answer is. So how much does it cost per ton, and how much total CO2 equivalent is abated? And then that's last bit of it, you have to think about what you did. So reflect on your work. Why is it important? What does it mean? Where is it applicable? What are the economic and social aspects, etc.? Tell me why or why not this can work. What are some challenges and how you can overcome them? And so it just forces you to think a little bit about it. So not too hard, not too crazy. You have 2 weeks or so to do this, I think. Yeah. And a little over 2 weeks. And I just basically want 5 slides and make one of those squares. Let me go back to the presentation. So this slide will be helpful. So these are your necessary inputs for a MAT calculation. So you need to, forecast the population of what could take advantage of that. If it's just you, then population is 1. If it's something like a Nest thermostat, you could just say this is what it'd be for a household, and then you'd multiply it by the number of households in, say, Bellingham, which is 39,506. And or if you want to do it for an entire region, you choose the appropriate population. U.S. Census data is really good for that. Sorry. All right, lecture's almost over anyways. You can read these necessary inputs for the calculation here, operation, maintenance costs, all these different things. You've done this so much now. The whole point of all the homeworks and why they're so detailed is so that you understand everything that goes into making a MAT calculation. Okay, some things are difficult to calculate, specifically this no action alternative. And so this no action alternative would be something, why things like land use is tricky. So like, what would be the alternative to grazing recently thawed permafrost? How do you calculate that? How much carbon would be emitted? What would be the cost? I don't know. It's going to take some thought. Please use like a discount rate or interest rate for your capital costs. 5% is a good guess. That's what municipal bonds are at. So when Bellingham borrows money, they have to take out a loan for 5%. It's lower than that right now because of coronavirus and the economy's gone crazy. But 5% is a good guess for this class. See what else I have here. There's an example of MAT curve, global MAT curve. Okay, I think that's it. You can get a lot of different measures for the city of Bellingham from the Climate Action Task Force report. I posted it on Canvas. Here's it here. Let me kind of blow this up a little bit. So each one of these measures is a mitigation strategy. Some of them are pretty straightforward, like switching water heaters from natural gas to electric heat pumps. Again, I did that as an example in lecture, so please don't use that one. Sorry, I stole it. But you have a lot of different measures. Some are really difficult to collect data on or think about what it'd be. And for those sorts of projects, I'm fine if you don't have absolute numbers. You can have huge ranges, and I'm more interested in your thinking and your structuring of the problem than the actual final result. That's why data and calculations is more important than that result part of it. And what else? Yeah, an example of that would be, one of the ideas in land use, I think. Measure L3, pilot, pavement to plazas and living streets. So convert Railroad Avenue to a walking mall, for example. So places like Burlington, Vermont, and Boulder, Colorado have done this. They've taken like kind of their main commercial core downtown and just say buck off cars. Only people can walk here, and we can have food trucks and parks and magicians and balloon animals and fun stuff. And increases revenues for all the shops and restaurants on that street, lowers carbon emissions, increases public health because people are walking instead of like idling their car trying to get the parking spot right in front of Mallard ice cream or something. So these are all good ideas, but super difficult to quantify, right? What would be the economic benefit of that? We know there clearly is one. What's the number? Who knows? So if you take on one of these more ambitious projects that are difficult to calculate, I will be much more forgiving in the data and calculation and results side parts of the report. So land use ag, these more nebulous land use things, or measures in the city of Bellingham or Huxley College. Okay.
Hey, Charlie,
Yeah.
you said Burlington, Vermont was a city that did that?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
And
Thank you.
Boulder, Colorado. I think Louisville, Kentucky just did it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is pavement to plaza kind of like the generic name to look up, or is it green space?
Pavement to plaza is taking parking lots and turning them into much better use. So, I mean, like the Hagen on Meridian, or even Seaholm Hagen's an even better example. That parking lot's enormous, and it's never even close to being full. Like, what is that for? Like,
Yeah.
people always just drive diagonally across all the stalls and try to crash into each other instead of taking the lanes because the parking lot's empty. So you could fill that up with stores and restaurants or a park or, community spaces. It'd just be much, much better. And so that's pavement to plazas. And living streets is taking car streets and turning them into walking streets. San Francisco does that downtown and in Golden Gate Park every Sunday. And so they do it one day a week. You could do it on much, much longer. Eloise is done.
She's out.
Okay, guys. I'm going to go take care of my 4-year-old daughter. Are there any quick questions in the last 30 seconds? You can feel free to email me. Thursday, we're just going to have a total working session on homeworks you haven't completed yet or project ideas. It's basically free for all. I'll just be on camera and happy to respond to whatever questions people have. Any questions?
Really quick, is
Yeah.
the Huxley dude, do we have contact for him, or is he going to be available to ask questions if we wanted to do?
Yeah, go ahead, email them. Just say that we're starting to think about mitigation strategies for Huxley College of Environment. He's probably got time. I doubt he doesn't teach classes and he doesn't really at work right now. So yeah, bug him.
What was his name again?
Steve Hollenhorst. He's the dean. If you just
Sweet.
Google like Huxley College of Environment, he'll be like at the top of the website. I
Sweet.
can post the email to Canvas too.
Sweet. Thank you.
Will we finish homework 4 on Thursday? We can do. It's technically due today, I think, but we can talk about it Thursday. No problem. Because I never got to the T-shirt problem or the Hawaiian shirt problem. So yeah, we can talk about homework 4 Thursday. Other questions? Okay.
Elvis has a question.
Yeah. Crying 4-year-old hurts my heart. I gotta go.
Thanks, Charlie.
Yeah. Bye.